Broadcasting from the Unshackled Studios in Melbourne. This is WilmsFront, brought to you by theunshackled.net. Now here's Tim Wilms.
Hello and welcome to the show. The date is Monday, the 6th of April 2020. We are live on the Tim Wilms YouTube channel. It is 7 p.m. here in Melbourne. Daylight savings is over on the eastern states now, so it's the same time here in Melbourne as it is in Brisbane, and of course over in Perth, which is, well, Western Australia is shut off from the Eastland. Now there's only a 2-hour time difference. I know that down here in Melbourne, once daylight savings was over, suddenly winter came. There's been a cold snap here. It's been raining. It's been quite chilly, so which is an interesting turn, given that we had a late summer developing here. But it is the cold snap is not welcome in our fight against the coronavirus, because that's when the normal cold and flu season begins. Back on our regular Monday show tonight. So or at least my Unshackled production schedule will be back in sync this week. But on with tonight's show. So in case, just to fill you in on the developments of the past few days, on Friday, after another National Cabinet meeting, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced we were now entering what he called the suppression phase of the coronavirus. So far, Australia is flattening the curve. There's been no new restrictions that have been announced, but we're told that restrictions that are in place now will last at least 6 months, according to governments, and there's been a few, some examples of draconian enforcement of such restrictions, which we'll get into. While we in Australia, we do see an end in sight and a road to recovery. In other Western nations, the infection and death tallies continue to exponentially rise. As a result, the national lockdowns in those countries are even more draconian than ours. Another Western nation that is fighting to contain the coronavirus with around the same number of infections and deaths is Israel, though they have a population of 9 million, while Australia has a population of 26 million. As a result, Israel's lockdown is one of the strictest in the world. So what's it like living in lockdown in Israel at the moment? My guest tonight is based in Tel Aviv, Israel. He operates the SJW Central YouTube channel, which has over 277,000 subscribers, with many of its compilation videos getting millions of views. And he joins me now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Tim.
Now, I'll explain our connection, how we cross paths. You contacted us through Twitter wanting to use some of our unshackled footage of SJW meltdowns here in our base in Melbourne. It's 2020 now, and with most of the Western world in lockdown, do you still have plenty of material?
Funnily enough, yeah, there's a ton of material build-up that I couldn't get to because I was so busy the last year. Right now, I'm actually an MMA coach. I teach MMA to kids and youth, so I barely had time for YouTube. So every time I run into SJW-related content, I'll just save it in a file and then just go back later to it when I have time and make compilation. There's a small bottleneck of on new content being created, but there's still Trump with his press conferences that creates enough content, at least for the second channel, to go over it as news. And sometimes when Biden reappears or resurfaces, there's a small, it's slowed down, but there's definitely still content out there for those of you that like anti-SJWism.
Well, if you count CNN as basically an SJW network, then yes, you will have lots of material. And of course, well, Biden cooped up in his home, he looks even makes even less sense.
Yeah. They just keep creating it, every single one of them. If you watch Rachel Maddow, Hardscope, any of the leftist media journals, you'll find enough content. So there's no worry about that.
Now, the reason I reached out to you for this interview is my New Zealand colleague, co-host of Trad Tasman Talk, Due de Boer. He has spoken how his parents were trapped in Israel during the lockdown. They are now safely back in New Zealand, obviously forced to isolate for 14 days, and told me how strictly it is being enforced. One of the measures that stood out to me is that you can't venture more than 100 meters outside of your home. How do you get
Yeah.
food is sort of in that situation.
So that's a bit confusing for those of you that didn't read the full guidelines. I have them in front of me. The 100 meters rule is for any leisurely activities, as you might call them, or just if you want to go outside of your home so you won't get cabin fever. Obviously, you can go out for anything that is essential, meaning getting groceries, um, getting your medicine. Funnily enough, even protest, which is weird because Israel doesn't have any constitution, but our constitution is sort of based around Supreme Court cases and Supreme Court's ruling. So I, apparently, protesting is part of the things you can do no matter what right now in Israel. Donating blood, getting medical service. So if they ever quote unquote catch you outside and ask you what you're going to do, just put a sign in your car and say you're going to protest, and I'll think you'll probably be fine. My sister came over to our house a couple of times the past 2 weeks, and the lockdown is strict, but it's not that strict as some people might think. Luckily enough, our public is usually very united when it comes to those things, facing previous threats like missiles being lobbed at us from Gaza, or other countries going to war with us back in the day, decades ago. The public is very united around those things, and they usually listen to the government. We're not as conscious about our civil rights as other Western countries. Most people in Israel won't mind their free speech or freedom of movement being curtailed right now to face the disaster right now, because they'll know we'll go back to normal once it's safe. There's a lot of trust in our government not to suppress our rights, so people don't mind those temporary restrictions.
Well, as you just said, Israel has regularly had rockets launched at it from Gaza, and obviously the wars since Israel's founding has got the citizenry used to basically being in a lockdown to protect them and their families, and obviously, well, the government, the military have won those conflicts. So there's obviously the citizenry there. There's obviously, as you said, there's much more national unity, where in Australia we've always been protected, the fact that we're an island nation, and obviously we haven't had those experiences that Israel had. The closest that we've ever come to sort of a nation knocking on our doorstep was Japan during World War II, that was over 80 years ago now. So I'm not sure how much you know of the Australian culture, but it's true we're a very laid back people. We like to travel. We're a large nation. That has allowed our government to slowly encroach on our freedoms because we are quite laid back, but because it's become so draconian now. If you'll just indulge me for a moment, this was a a news item today that a teenage learner driver in my home state of Victoria was fined $1,600. This is the fine for
Phew.
breaching the social distancing and essential travel guidelines for driving with her mum during the lockdown. The mother was supervising her daughter as she drove from Hampton home to Frankston at the weekend when the pair were pulled over by police and fined for non-essential travel because Hampton is probably about 45 minutes away from Frankston. So the police officer deemed they were too far away from home and will cop a fine, and that it would be the learner driver, her name was Hunter, to receive that fine. When the mother and daughter questioned the fine, Sherry said police officer told her police were smashing it on the roads today, and there's a copy of the infringement notice there. The governments and health authorities, they've said police have got discretion when they pull people over, but it's not widespread. But if you get a police officer who sort of wants to throw their weight around and decides to pull you over, you can be the unlucky one, like this girl Hunter was. So there's sort of these, most of the time people are left alone, but you can, if you can get pulled over and they don't think your explanation is sufficient, they can give you a fine.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Honestly, if they're moving on their own in their own car, not cross-contaminating or meeting with other people, it should be fine. Obviously, I'm not an health official. I'm not aware of all the variables, but I think all the governments across the world should probably allow those type of activities, like you said, that girl with the learner's permit just learning to drive, or if you want to go visit your girlfriend, wife, spouse, your family, it should be fine as long as you don't go outside in public to other places where you can catch the disease and spread it around. As long as you move within your family unit, I think it should be okay. They probably shouldn't restrict it. Obviously, that's the rules we have right now. We have to deal with it. Hopefully, once we get over it, it won't be that the government would move back and not encroach on our rights with that excuse in mind. Obviously, it's awful. $1,600. I know it in Australian dollars is not as much as a US dollar, but that's still a lot of money for her just driving around. I don't think she risked anyone, even if she carried a disease. But again, I'm not an health official. I don't have that education to tell you about it. But assuming she was strictly in her car driving around, she probably shouldn't be fined.
The rule that we have now, and it's announced by the Prime Minister, but the way our federal system works is the states and territories enforce it. So we have the 2-person gathering limit, which includes household, though you're told you're only meant to leave the house, gather with another person if it's for essential work, education, exercising, or for essential shopping. And you mentioned visiting your girlfriend or partner. We did have in Victoria, it lasted about 6 hours, where visiting a partner who you weren't living with was non-essential travel, and it was termed I'm not sure if you've ever heard this expression before, a bonking ban, because one of our prime ministers before, Malcolm Turnbull, announced a ban on ministers having sexual relations with their staffers, and it was termed a bonking ban. So it's become basically a colloquial in our culture. But in terms of are you allowed to visit friends, or is that discouraged? Can you get a fine for that?
Yeah, we can get a fine for it. My girlfriend's right now locked in base. She's gonna be there for a whole month. And once she gets out, she's obviously, not only by the Israeli guidelines, but military guidelines, she can't meet me. She can only go out for essential things, just like I've said before. which includes protesting, donating blood, getting medical services, buying groceries. Obviously, it's not enforced to that extent because people are obviously visiting their loved ones. Probably some of them will do Passover is right around the corner, like in 2 days. Some people will probably go to their families and celebrate it there, even though it's not allowed. And I think the government's taken that to account. The only issues we have right now is with the super religious communities refusing to not gather outside, and they have already accrued a ton of fines. And
Places of worship shut?
no, not places of worship. Strictly super religious. You asked if places of worship are. As far as I know, they're not. You can go there, but most people don't. In Judaism, you have a basic principle. It goes pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat, meaning that health comes first. So. Worship comes second. So if it's a risk to your health, you can pray at home, even if there's no 10 people around, which is required for a Jewish prayer. You can do it at home, whichever is the least risk to you. And once you get over it, you can back to your day-to-day life. But the most fanatic ones, the most crazy religious communities, like the one in Nebrak, which is a religious city, I think they have the most cases in Israel because they refuse again to stay at home. They go to their synagogue. They crowd around. I think some of them, even in Jerusalem, which are even the more fanatic sects of Judaism, keep fighting with the police there. They've accrued a ton of fines, which they obviously can't pay because most of them are on some sort of weird welfare in Israel, which is something you really need to dive into to understand. But basically, they have a ton of donations keeping them afloat, so they don't have to work. Some of them get what do you call it? When you give like a welfare check, basically, as well. So not only are they accruing a ton of fines that they will never pay anyway, they're risking their entire community. But luckily for us, as fanatic as they are, they do keep to themselves and don't commingle with the secular society, so they don't pose a threat to us. But it's a weird situation in here. They're not leaking any temples like they do in Iran, but they just won't follow the guidelines from the government because they just want to go and practice their religion.
Is that are people finding that annoying? The fact that everyone else is abiding by the lockdown, but they're not, because that is, I know that in Australia that's what frustrates people the most, whether it's a blunder by the government or just people frequently ignoring the self-isolation things, that there should be, the law should apply to everybody because this virus doesn't discriminate.
Yeah, I think there's a very, the entire Israeli public is very, very mad at them because of previous things as well. Before the same sect that doesn't follow the guidelines is the same sect that doesn't do the military service that everybody requires to do. They don't go to work, they're on welfare, so there's a very hostile sentiment towards them for a while building up right now. And this for sure doesn't help, especially within the religious community. You have Israel is very divided. The religious society in Israel is divided to several streams. You have the national Jews, you have the just the traditional Jews, the ones that are super hardcore, you have the Reform Jews, and this specific part of our society is very disliked by pretty much everyone except them because they live in their own communities. They don't contribute to the economy. They don't go to work, and they don't serve in the army. Quite the opposite. If some of them have dissidents that would serve in the army, once they go back home, they'll spit at them, they'll mock them, they even attack them. So it's just our that's our just one of this is the our shitty community basically. Everybody has their basket of rotten apples. That's our basket of rotten apples that sadly we have to deal with.
Yeah, that does sound pretty terrible to put up with. You mentioned that there's no ban on places of worship. In Australia, all places of worship have been forced to close, and this is despite the fact that our Prime Minister Scott Morrison, he's a Pentecostal Christian. The main church that he has association with is Hillsong Church. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them, but it's one of those mega churches where they have an arena, and so obviously it's a large social gathering. And you mentioned you've got Passover coming up, we've got Easter at week's end, and so they're going to be streaming the Easter services and treating places of worship as, and this is the technicality, as workplaces, so you're allowed to have more than 2 people there as long as social distancing is practiced, but no attendees at all, and social distancing has to be adhered to. And Christian community here has been, to the best of my knowledge, completely compliant, as of all the other because Australia is a multi-religious society. We have Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists. There's been no flouting of that by any religious sect or anybody.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is because practicing Judaism is a day-to-day thing. You have like 3 main prayers each day, in the morning, in the evening, and the noon. And you also have several prayers in betweens. You have prayers after you wash your hands, before you eat your food, basically for anything. So it's a religion that's practiced daily. So it's harder for those who follow it very strictly to keep away. While, as far as I know, Christians practice it once a week when they go to church on Sunday. There's no real requirement to go to pray in your church, correct me if I'm wrong, daily. So that's why for them, I think it's harder to stay away from it, but still, it's not an excuse. And as far as the religion go, again, it specifically tells them that when things like that happen, they should and can stay at home. And overall, I'm pretty pleased with how everybody sticks to the rules here, especially even the religious community who, discluding the extremist side of it, follow the rules. They pray at home. I have a younger brother who's in a yeshiva, which is, again, is like the equivalent of born-again Christian, I guess. He lived traditional Jewish life with us. We celebrate the holidays, but we don't pray daily. We don't go to the synagogue. We don't keep the Sabbath. We use electricity and everything. And then he got more religious, and he joined the yeshiva, studied there. They're one of the more extreme parts of the religion. But after I had a talk with him and explained him that how much danger he would pose to our parents if he goes to prayer and then comes back here and he's carrying the disease, our parents being very old. He understood it, and now he's praying at home. He's studying they're basically Jewish scholars, so he's studying the Torah at home. He's doing everything from here, rarely leaving the house. I myself self-isolated a week before we had the guidelines in our country. A couple of my friends came back from abroad, and I train jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I do it daily, And obviously it's submission wrestling, so you come in contact with people all the time. So if anybody's carrying it, the entire group is gonna carry it eventually. So as soon as we had people coming back from abroad in the group and going back to training, I was like, no, I'm staying at home. A week before the guidelines even started, I self-isolated. As of right now, I don't have any symptoms. The last time I was outside was a week ago to get some groceries, which is a weird experience. Honestly, you have people waiting in line for 20 minutes with masks and gloves. Right now, everybody's following the guidelines. I only saw maybe one or two guys without any masks,
Also, most
which
people
is
are
rare.
wearing masks out in public because that's not the case in Australia. So I would say there's quite, I'd say about 25% of people outside are wearing masks in Australia, but overwhelming majority are not.
Uh, the, um, in Israel's case, everybody's wearing it outside. We obviously have no shortages, luckily enough for us. Uh, we're a smaller country. Our healthcare system um, is pretty decent. I don't think it can bear a ton of load. We had some shortages in the last couple of years, like bed shortages, even when there wasn't a pandemic. But as far as I know, they're handling the load pretty well. We only have like 50 deaths right now, 15 deaths right now. Um, there's no flood as far as I'm aware, and people everywhere, most of them are wearing actually the N95 masks, which are the ones you're supposed to wear. I rarely see any of them wear the surgical masks, which are not that good as far as I know. Everybody's wearing gloves, and nobody's taking the like shopping carts or anything that could carry the virus on it. People are very, very careful. You have people in our supermarket. The security guard um, does the thermometer check on your forehead if you want to go inside. Obviously, if you show symptoms or anything or have fever, they'll send you home. Um, they share the information here pretty quick. If they found one of the corona, where one of the guys infected, they'll go with him over every place he's been in the last few days where he might have been contagious. And most people tend to stick away from those places once they post it. So let's say supermarket A had 2 corona cases in there, guys going shopping there. So everybody stays away from there for the next 2 weeks. Again, luckily for us, our public and our national, we're very united nationally, so there's no issue following the guidelines, and the risk is pretty small in here. And since it's a Middle Eastern country, our summers are very hot, and as far as I know, the virus won't stand the 65 Celsius heat for too long, so it kills it in like a couple of hours. So once we get to the summer, it won't spread as quickly, even if it's on steel surfaces or plastic outside. As long as it's in the sun, it will go above that degree and will kill the virus eventually. So the spread will definitely slow down.
As I said in my introduction, we're heading towards winter here in the southern hemisphere, and our governments, the reason why they've, in the end, decided to go so hard on the containment measures and restrictions is because they're fearing, because we had a shocking cold and flu season last winter. I got the flu myself, and I gave it to my colleagues in the local alternative media here, and we're all out sick for a couple of weeks. Well, I don't know if I gave it to them or they gave it to me, but we're all knocked out. It was totally horrible to go through. So they're preparing, basically we have a mixed system where we have a public system which works as a safety net, but if you want to pay premium, you can go to private hospitals, though our government has basically nationalized the private hospitals now since they've banned most elective surgeries. But that's interesting to know that even the supermarkets are doing temperature checks there. We've also got the fact that we, as I said, despite we are an island nation, we're a jet-setting nation, and we are both geopolitically close and dependent on China, which is where this virus was born. And as Binary Agenda has pointed out, we'd wear masks if we could buy them because it's been going on for a number of years in Australia. Chinese people in Australia buying goods on bulk to ship back to China, and there were two Chinese-owned firms which during January and February were buying, stockpiling masks and hand sanitizer, other essential medical supplies to send them back to China. So that's also why a lot of us would like to wear masks, but it's so they've been difficult to obtain, and we've also had all their panic buying as well. I'm not sure if you saw some of the toilet paper fights that happened in Australia. We sort of started that panic buying. I'm not sure if there's been a lot of our supermarkets are catching up with restocking. I'm not sure if there's been any of that in Israel.
No, we have a ton of toilet paper all around every supermarket you can go to. Honestly, it's only a freak out that I've seen in the US and in Australia and the UK for no good reason, because you can just buy a cheap bidet off of Amazon for like $8. You install it on every single toilet. You can put it on every single toilet and just restreams the water up there, so you don't need any toilet paper. And from what I've heard, they've already restocked it around the US and the UK, and people are actually looking to return their panic buy toilet paper because they're realizing now that they would never get to use it. Right now, they'll use it over several years, so they didn't actually need to buy that.
Yes, exactly.
Many. Yeah. So that was probably the worst panic buy. When I go to the supermarket, I usually buy cans right now and food that will survive. I bought a ton of meat just so it won't get boring in here. I've been eating steak pretty much every day right now. One of the things that this pandemic taught me is that I spend too much money outside, and actually when I buy those basic ingredients and cook it at home, I save a ton of money and eat like a king every single day. Like I've eaten steak
exactly right.
every single day right now. I've been cooking pizza at home. It's been kind of fun. Obviously, I'm one of the lucky guys who was able to save a lot of money, and I can bear this. I can stand this pandemic if it goes several months. Also, I generate my income from home, so it doesn't really affect my livelihood as long as the YouTube ad revenue slows down. So obviously, I hate to use the word because it's so overused in the SJW world, but I'm of the more privileged one who can bear the expenses and withstand that time. Obviously not unlike everybody right now who's losing their job and they have rent to pay and a ton of bills to catch up to, which is terrible, obviously. Hopefully we can get the economy back up and running in like a month or two with social distancing. I'm pretty sure we can do it in Israel because of the summer. It will slow down the spread. From what I've heard from experts, the peak is going to be mid-May. And once we go there, it's going to be flattening out slowly. I think China really needs to pay for it.
Yeah, that's what the attitude developing here in Australia as well, that they should pay reparations and compensation like Germany did after World War I and II. And it's been a political issue in Australia for the past 6 months, our dependence on China, and they've conducted a lot of espionage here as well, and a lot of the political class have been quite scared here to stand up to China, but there's growing animosity amongst the ordinary citizen, and now the politicians, they're feeling that animosity, and we as a nation don't want to go through this again because, as just said, a lot of people have lost their jobs. We're a sporting nation, so all of our sports seasons have been cancelled. All of our pubs, clubs, restaurants, cafes, they've been forced to shut. They can only do takeaway. So it's really crippled our way of life.
I think we had plenty of reasons to go after China before the pandemic, even with the Uyghur situation they
Yes.
have, where they have the concentration camps, the child labor, the pollution, everything they did up until now, they're slowly encroaching on Africa. Uh, b- um, Everything they do around the world was an excuse for us to go after it. But it's funny how right now I had that epiphany when I stood there in the supermarket waiting in line for 20 minutes just to get to buy my shit, and was like, wow, all it took for me to actually want something to be done against Chinese was not them oppressing their people, the obvious human rights violation, everything they did around the world. It's when it affected me, when they made me wait in line, wear stupid masks, stay at home, be forced not to see my girlfriend or my loved ones. And I think it really goes to show you that people only care about their day-to-day life, their economy, how it affects them, and that's how you get a political movement. And I think that's how Trump won, because he talked to those people who have felt they've been heard that way, their income, their day-to-day life. And I think once we get over this pandemic, the animosity is just going to build up to a point where at least the people would ask for an embargo, and in the worst case scenario, a war, once we see the entire damage that this cover-up by the Chinese government had cost us. Not only people have died, the economy has slowed down to a halt. People are losing their jobs, their homes, and it will take a lot to get over it. And hopefully, once we're over it, we won't forget it, and we will make them pay. Um, it's been funny to see it on Twitter, because everybody who's talking about it, about the fact that China needs to pay, they've been shadow banned, which is ridiculous. If you go to their tweets, like tweet replies or things like that, you won't be able to find their tweets unless you go onto their page. And you also have Chinese bots running counterintelligence, blaming the US for the pandemic, which is ridiculous.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And
That's insulting to our intelligence.
and I gather you watch a lot of the US cable news, so I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of Tucker Carlson's monologues,
course.
which he's easily the best at Fox, and I'd say the most objective as well. Sorry. He's talked about how China has been able to use identity politics, race politics against us by saying that if you oppose the China's geopolitical goals, then you're racist. And
yeah, they have a word for it in Chinese. I forgot it. Basically, for white guilt, which is ridiculous.
xenophobia is that's what they accuse people of, and it's been effective in the past in Australia during the beginning of the outbreak in January, February. It was put out by the political class that no, this is not an excuse to be racist. And when Scott Morrison put the travel ban on China, the local socialist alternative, I'm not sure if you've come across that, they're quite an active SJW Antifa group that protests. They held a protest in our city of Melbourne protesting the racist China travel ban. One of the commenters in our live chat, Pissy Leaks Pete, also known as Peter V, he filmed it and has uploaded it. So that's something, if you're wanting to highlight that,
Yeah.
he can direct you to that footage.
Yeah, I think it's lucky for us, and I'm proud of my government for doing it. So probably one of the first governments to actually close down the border to China, and we have a ton of Chinese tourists go to Jerusalem, which is weird because it's an atheist country. But I'm glad they made that move really, really fast and closed up. I think Israel is probably one of the first countries to close the border to the Chinese people. It's a shame we didn't close it to the entire world fast enough so we won't get there. Um, but yeah, I think I was gonna talk about something. I completely forgot it. But yeah, their bots running counterintelligence right now is probably one of the funniest thing. It seems like they don't even put any effort into it. There's a ton of broken English statements which are uh, pure lies. They're now blaming the U.S. Army for spreading the virus, which again is it's completely
Yeah, there's no
ridiculous.
evidence at all for that. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, we know that the two most likely scenarios is that it came from a wet market in Wuhan. It's evolved from bat coronavirus, and they have bats for sale in those wet markets. Might not have been the bat soup dish itself, but some form of eating bats. And I know that there's
Yeah.
also a lot of people who've noted that there's a bioweapons facility just outside of Wuhan, and it could have been either an accidental or intentional release from there. So it was definitely born in Wuhan, China.
Yeah, I actually my sister-in-law she's I don't know if she's a PhD yet or already a PhD, but she's I don't know how it translates to English, but basically lab medicine. She's one of the people actually dealing with the pandemic and trying to come up with um, a vaccine or a cure. And when I talked to her, she told me there's no way this is like a randomly spawned DNA. This is definitely man-made. The chance of it being randomly generated DNA is very, very unlikely. Um, and I think also Chinese scientists came out of the Chinese universities saying it's probably man-made, which makes it even worse. I think reporters are just now getting to the fact that it spread around the Wuhan biolab, and they're starting to investigate it. I know a ton of alternative media talked about it, but now mainstream journalists are actually going after it and investigating the story, and hopefully we'll get an answer. But I don't think we should blame our government. Yes, they could have responded way better, way faster. Some of them were extremely incompetent, like the one in Italy where they had a hug a Chinese day.
Yes.
If yeah, that was the most Darwinist thing that probably could have happened. Those people deserve to die off. Why would you do that? A pandemic running amok around the world, and this is the best time to be PC and prove you're not racist and to virtue signal, even to the detriment of your entire society. And it's tragically funny because Italy just a couple of days ago had the biggest death count, and they had hug a Chinese day in the middle of February. Mind you, it's not like when it started back in January, December. Um, they had that. They had it in the middle of February when people started closing down the borders, which is so stupid. I couldn't believe it once I read it. It was like this is the definition of clown world. This is why this world feels like the worst timeline of a simulation. Somebody's basically playing Plague Inc. in this world, and we're just the subject for it. Because I remember seeing like a week ago some guy dropping dead in a Chinese bus from what's called the hantavirus. And from what it seems, it's just one death. It's not another pandemic,
This
but
is
it's getting pretty
that
crazy.
comes from rats, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah.
about that as well. That there was a death from that, but we know that there. I'm not sure what your media is like, but our mainstream media, because they're dying and going broke. They've tried to use this as an opportunity to scare people with as much information as possible, to sell newspapers, get eyeballs and that, because it's alternative media like us which people are going to.
Yeah, in our country right now, people don't like the media, but we have it's not like as distrusted as you have it in the US or in Australia, because people still believe the news in here, but they go to their preferred channel. You have a more conservative news channel, you have a more left-leaning, a centrist one. But like I said, I don't follow Israeli politics as close as I used to do before SJW Central, honestly, because the US politics even affect our politics more than our regional ones. Like, if you have a conservative president, it affects us more than us having a left or a right-wing government, because the US calls the shot, basically. But like I said, there's still investigative journalism in here. The mainstream media has some trust in it. Once I get to like watch it every once in a while, and like there's still some journalistic standards being kept, unlike CNN and MSNBC, which MSNBC is like the Alex Jones of the left-wing media. Rachel Maddow just screams random conspiracy theories all day. Yeah, MSNBC. What did I say?
The CNN.
Oh no, I think I said CNN and then I said MSNBC,
Okay.
which has, yeah. So MSNBC is completely ridiculous right now. But yeah, I think a lot of people have a ton of misconceptions about Israel because it's a Middle Eastern country. So people think, oh, it's third world. When they hear we deployed the army, they think, oh, they're shooting people on the street. It's not like that. Our military is some branches of it are part of the Israeli police. So that's why when they say they deploy the military, it's just another section of the police that's part of the military, our border patrol unit, basically.
The only role for our military at this stage is enforcing the mandatory quarantining of those arriving from overseas, because in Australia it was the same as what you've said in Israel, that the governments, even though they eventually closed all the borders, they were still too slow, because since we are in a globalized and in terms of people movement and trade, that allows the virus to spread quickly, but we're so interdependent on other nations now that governments, they're basically in denial that there was going to be a pandemic that was going to arrive, and of course they didn't. When we talk about economic activity, I know that the left have tried to abstract that to say, oh, what good's an economy when people are dying? But I always substitute the word economy to standard of living and quality of life. And obviously, both of our economies have taken a hit here, but there's definitely an attitude here, since we are seen to be flattening a curve, that we need to, because Australia in the 20th century, because we were an island nation, we pretty much were self-sufficient, but we have become interconnected with particularly Asia and China, and so there's definitely a feeling that we need to go back to our own manufacturing. Like, we don't make cars in Australia anymore. We only have 30 days worth of petrol security. So if we get cut off from the Middle East oil supply, 30 days will run out.
Yeah, I think that we should lower our reliance on countries on countries that are not your country, obviously. I know they've been doing it in Israel since the beginning. Like, we have our own agriculture. Sadly, we don't have oil in our country, and the ones we had, we gave it back for peace treaties. But I think the entire world right now should move towards making a better localized economy rather than a globalized one. I know it's unavoidable having a globalized economy like we have right now because of Amazon and things like that, but we need to lower our reliance on countries from the outside, like China, which right now just completely fucked the entire world. And because of our reliance on it, they'll probably get away with it. Our governments won't do anything to them. Trump seems very favorable when he talks about China. He says he's been in very close discussions with Xi Jinping, and it's really fruitful. There's not a ton of animosity between the governments, only building up in our societies rather than the government when they talk with China. I used to be a really hardcore free market guy, but I've been more open-minded lately to creating a better economy in your own country before you just go, oh, let the free market do everything. I think because of Trump right now, I'm also more open-minded to tariffs and things like that that improve your local economy, because essentially the free market and everything we talk about is a tool to better our lives. It's not a religion. The free market is not a religion. It's there because it makes our lives better, our products cheaper, our wages bigger, and that's why I'll protect it always, but there needs to be some protections to our economies. You need to keep in mind that it's there to save us, to serve us rather than us just following it blindly. And that's why I think it got us to this point where the US is so reliant right now on China because all of their medicine is coming from China, and they have barely any local industry making those much needed medicines. So they, even if they want to go after China, they can't do anything right now.
I thought it was interesting there that Vladimir Putin, he sent supplies to the United States to help them fight the coronavirus, and that sort of seemed like it was basically a troll by him to basically, see, I'm going to help you here. Are you going to call this Russian interference? Are you going to accuse me of colluding with Trump? And it just amazing. Obviously, Russia is a different power than China, but it just sort of made me seem that this is sort of geopolitics, that a world leader is trolling another country by providing them with aid to fight a pandemic.
Yeah, I think the Trump opened the floodgates for political trolling all around the world. There's definitely that angle to it when Putin sent this aid to the US, because the journalists would obviously go crazy about it because it's basically the US aiding Trump, the Russia aiding Trump. But it's a good kind of aid. It's a much needed medicine, so they don't know how to go after it. But I'm pretty sure they did anyway, just like they did after the My Pillow guy who created the masks. I think they went after him because he's a very conservative guy. I saw it trending on Twitter a couple of days, so there's no limit to them. They'll go after anyone who's pro Trump. It's like an old meme, but it's true. If Trump is going to say tomorrow that he's pro-oxygen, all the Democrats would hold their breath until they die, basically. And that's what this few months been feeling like, the last few weeks.
Well, he's been talking about that drug, which I can't pronounce the name off the top of my head.
Something hydrochloroquine, something like that.
Yeah, so he suggested that could treat coronavirus, and there was that couple in the state of Arizona who self-medicated and died from it, and it seems like now they're...
Self-medicated is very generous of you to say. They drank a fish tank cleaner that had the ingredients in it.
Well, you shouldn't self-medicate something like that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Period. But they... this is how the Trump derangement syndrome works, is that the media now has a bias against that drug, even though it could treat coronavirus. But because Trump, which he probably shouldn't have talked about it, because our leaders haven't talked about what sort of drugs will treat it. They're pinning a lot of their hopes on a vaccine, but it shows that even because Trump suggested a particular drug, they don't want that drug used to help treat coronavirus.
Yeah, from what I've read about the drug, if there were barely competent journalists, they would know that this drug causes sight damage and hearing loss. I don't know how temporary it is, but there's long-lasting after effects that they could have talked about if they wanted to go after this drug to slam on Trump, but they just went straight ahead to slamming on Trump with no facts, just being anti this drug, even though they know nothing about it. Obviously, it's not a good one. Like you had a ton of people in Africa super happy about the fact that the US is going to start using this drug because they've been using it for several years, and it has, like I said, a ton of after effects like hearing loss, vision loss, and it's not that the best for you. From what I've read as well, they've been trying it in China with mediocre success, so it's not what we've been looking for. But again, if they did the very little investigative journalism, they would found out that it's not the best for you, even disregarding the corona completely because of all the side effects it has. But they just went after Trump anyway, which is stupid.
Now, as we previously stated, this disease, the coronavirus, doesn't discriminate. And since politicians and celebrities, they travel around the world, they're the ones that have suffered from the coronavirus. Well, they're the ones who've been able to get tested. So our Home Affairs Minister, Peter Dutton, he was diagnosed with coronavirus. He's basically the head kicker in our government. He's in charge of stopping the illegal boat arrivals, and he said about those who hoarding from supermarkets to resell, I'm coming after you. There was a lot of our political left, they celebrated that he had coronavirus because, well, they accused him of torturing refugees and asylum seekers and claimed that our offshore detention centers are like concentration camps. So he's the most senior member of the government to get the virus, and three other senators have got it. There's a government senator, Andrew Bragg. He got it at a wedding, and he gave it to another senator, Rex Patrick, and then there was a Queensland senator, Susan McDonald, who got the coronavirus. Who of the high-profile government officials in Israel who've contracted it?
I think, as far as I know, none of them actually. There's a ton of misinformation spread around the WhatsApp groups. I heard one of the Arabic Parliament's members get it, but it was fake news. So as far as I know, none of them. I think the infection rate in Israel right now is 8,000 people out of 9 million. So that's like 0.01% of infection, which is very, very low chance to actually get one of our ministers, because the entire Israeli parliament is 120 people. So considering the infection rate and the amount of existing parliament members, it's very unlikely that one of them will catch it. But I think it's funny that Iran had a press conference where they talked about it, that they have it under control, and one of the health ministers showing symptoms in the middle of the press conference.
Wiping his forehead with a handkerchief or paper towel. It's interesting that you say that's misinformation, because there's been reports that Netanyahu has had to go into isolation because one of his advisors had coronavirus. Is that not true?
I think so, but it's saying he has it would be misinformation. It's probably under self-isolation just to be safe. I think a ton of people are. Israel is very extreme about the measures. They don't kid around when they face this pandemic. Like we already have anti-hoarding rules. Like you can only buy like 2 cartons of eggs, 2 cartons of milk. When it comes to like basic groceries, but you can buy as much meat as you want, and like everything's getting restocked pretty quick, which is great. That's why I love that we live in a capitalist society.
Yes.
And it's that these past few weeks has been a spit in the face to any socialist who thought capitalism would fail, because the supermarkets are full every single time I go to it, and there's lines from here to the end of the street, which kind of reinforces the fact that we chose the right way to govern our economy.
There's been, I'm not sure if you've seen the memes where it says, how's everyone enjoying their 30-day trial of socialism? I know that some
Yeah,
of the socialists have tried to argue, oh, this is late stage capitalism with the empty
yeah,
supermarkets. But if we're in a socialist society, there wouldn't be anything in the supermarkets to
yeah.
begin with.
Without the pandemic, yeah,
Yeah, and I know that my local supermarket toilet paper is has now returned in abundance. The shelves are full of it, and it's not going off the shelf like it did. And this is less than a month. Like capitalism only took less than a month to basically get the toilet paper there again. We probably need some rice, pasta, and flour back on the shelf, and we'll be back to normal. But there has been, obviously, our government has intervened quite significantly. Well, obviously, in shutting down the businesses, but in terms of they've introduced a wage subsidy called JobKeeper. They've also expanded the unemployment benefit. It's called Job Seeker. We've already slapped on another 322 billion dollars in debt, and they've introduced universal childcare as well. But in Australia, it's basically been businesses working with each other. For example, our main airline, Qantas, they're redistributing their workers to be in supermarkets. Same with our leading cinema chain, Village Roadshow, because the businesses know, well, we can't operate now, but we still want staff
yeah.
when we get back. So there's a lot of businesses who getting together, making their own arrangements to look after the worker, and also making their logistics and supply chains more efficient as well.
It's actually smart. I think it's really telling how when you see how well each company moved away from creating the things they did, like Tesla and other companies, to just creating like 3,000 ventilators in days, which is amazing. And it just goes to show you that this is the best system known to man right now. And That's the way we should keep it. Every time somebody comes up with any socialist sentiment, we should just shut it down. Like if we were going into this pandemic without capitalism as part of the way we run our economy, I think we would be doing 10 times worse than we're doing right now. Um, and it's really I'd like to commend those companies as well for moving so quick to creating those much needed resources, like the masks, the ventilators, just like they would in a time of war. For those of you that don't know, like in World War II, all of the like any vehicle company basically moved to creating tanks, ships, and we did it just like that right now with the resources needed to face this pandemic, which is great, honestly.
Well, some of the bigger stuff ups during this pandemic in Australia have been by governments. A lot of cruise ships dock in Australian waters. Most of our major cities are by the harbour side, and there was this cruise ship called the Ruby Princess, which is run by Carnival Cruises. It in late March was allowed to disembark by the state port authority. 2,700 people disembarked, even though many of them had flu-like symptoms, and that's been the biggest single cluster of infections and deaths in Australia due to that port authority's decision to let it dock. And I'm not sure if, because I know that I'll just bring up the graphic here where Tel Aviv is by the Mediterranean Sea. People sometimes might forget that Israel also has a maritime border. Is there cruise ships that dock in Tel Aviv and other seaside cities in Israel? Has that
As
been
far
a
as I
problem?
know, no, I don't think so. Once Israel closed its borders, it closed it completely. I don't think we have any PC-related issues once it comes to our government. We can make all those moves with very little public outcry. Like people don't go, "Oh, it's racist to close the Chinese border," because they know it serves a function. Luckily enough for us, we don't have that white guild that they can bank on. So once we close the borders, I'm sure we close it for everything other than trade, which is not risky as far as I know, because the virus can only live like on cartons and on cardboard and still for like 3 days. And most deliveries here take a week or two, even the fast ones.
It's not like that Simpsons episode with the Osaka flu, where it takes 6 to 8 weeks for the juicer to get from Japan to America, and the flu germs are still there. That's 24 hours is the most that's what our government has said it is on cardboard. So even if you have a packer who has the flu and coughs in the cardboard, it's going to die in 24 hours.
Yeah, even with 1 day delivery on Amazon, which I think is like 2 days, 3 days right now because of the overload. I think it's still, it's again a greater testament to capitalism of how our system is still functioning, even with all the hardship around us. Fucking Amazon still doing short deliveries, like 2 or 3 days. And supermarkets still restocking. People actually going to work and making money. What I'm interested to know is how's your social safety net for the guys who are unemployed or self-employed right now in Australia?
I just explained it before. So we have a wage subsidy for those who've been not fired, but stood down. That's sort of the new word, where businesses have had to shut. They haven't dismissed their workers; they're stood down without pay, and so that's why they've come up with this JobKeeper welfare pack, so that they have a wage during the pandemic, and so that they can go back to work. Australia has always had I would say, a moderate welfare state, and coupled with a healthcare system where there's a safety net with the public option, though you can always pay premium for private. Has your government had to introduce a similar type of new unemployment benefit, or for those who've either lost their job or been stood down?
I think they're introducing something that's gonna be it's not gonna be like they do it in the US, which you basically get your tax return earlier. They're gonna pay you like a paycheck, basically, depending if you were self-employed, especially depending on your income. And seems like a decent amount, especially it could definitely keep you floating when you're not going out and spending your money on restaurants or things like that, which you can do anyway right now. And we've always had decent unemployment benefits. the only welfare part of our state is the, like I said, the extreme religious community that's not working or not serving in the army. So there's always been that, but other than that, we have a pretty good social safety net. Our I don't know how to put our healthcare system into terms. I don't know what single or multiple payer means, but basically our I pay for my insurance like $80 a month and everything's covered. Like most of it, other than and most of dental with very small co-payments. So I think our health system is pretty much similar to you. We don't have any private hospitals. All of it is nationalized and subsidized. So I guess we're lucky on that
Well, we
part.
did have private hospitals, which during the pandemic have been effectively nationalized. So I have private health cover myself, which covers things such as dental care. But if you can see a doctor for free in Australia, it's called being bulk billed. Like you might have to wait an hour or so in well, it's not going to be crowded now, it's called a general practitioner's clinic, but you'll still get to be able to see the doctor for free. Our medicine is, some essential medicines are subsidized through what's called the PBS, a pharmaceutical benefit scheme, which basically brings down the price of a lot of drugs significantly.
Yeah, we have the same thing here, I guess. Most of our medicine, again, is subsidized. They have what they call the, roughly translated to English, the medicine basket, where each year they choose all these super essential medicines and then they subsidize it. And some people who need like the more niche ones kind of fall between the line, but mostly it's a decent system. It pays for itself. Like I said, like $80 a month, and you get like the best package, the platinum package, is what they call it. I think you have. I think we have. It's funny. I'm gonna trigger the chat if I say it, but you have subsidized rhinoplastic surgeries, so you can go hog wild with that in chat. Yes, in Israel. Yeah, but our healthcare system is pretty good. Yeah.
I did not know that. That's quite a fun fact.
Yeah, it's really funny actually.
Now, most of us in Australia hear about news from Israel in the context of the Arab-Israeli conflict, which has basically been ongoing since Israel was founded in 19...
Even before that.
Yes, because there was the big migration before that as well, when it was British Palestine. But obviously, there's been the wars, and then there's the sort of mini wars with the rockets fired out of Gaza and into to Gaza. During the pandemic, are rockets still being fired from Gaza? What has been, because all sort of other news like that, geopolitical conflicts are sort of been buried. I mean, we've all forgotten now.
Yeah.
Everyone was scared about World War III at the beginning of the year with US-Iran tensions.
From what I know, I think it's they call it trickling in Israel, where they sometimes lob one rocket or two of them. So there's probably some of that, but there's not like an ongoing situation right now in there. I think, as far as I know, they don't have any Palestinians carrying the pandemic, and they understand that. I think they understand the situation right now, and they don't want to upset the balance, especially because most people won't cover them. So if they start attacking Israel pretty much have blank check to do anything in there.
Because they still control a lot of the shipping into Gaza,
Yeah.
and it's one of the most densely populated areas in the world. So it can also
I think
act
that's
as an
actually
incubator.
yeah, I think that the most densely populated thing is like a myth. I know it's obviously densely populated, but a lot of people like usually tout Gaza is the most densely populated place in the world. That's not true. Just to set the facts straight. But yeah, I think that we use the same standards with our shipping and our containers, so they're pretty much safe as because there's again, like I said, the same standards that the government use for us would probably use for them. Um, there's not a lot of Palestinian travel, especially in this time, other than I don't think there's any at all actually, because like we said, prayers are restricted right now, which is what most of the Palestinian permits are based around, like Friday prayers, job permits to go into Israel. Um, so I don't think they have. They're probably one of the safest people right now around the world to not get infected, and they're probably the only ones that won't get infected eventually. Uh, so yeah,
So they understand the Palestinians, Hamas at this time. It's not the best time to launch rockets if you're depending
yeah.
on Israel to facilitate essential supplies into Gaza.
Yeah, exactly. Not only that, but if they do that, Israel would basically be able to attack them in any way they want, and most of the media won't cover it. So it's not a good PR move for them as well. Usually, when they do those attacks, they usually go, they do some protests where they have Molotov cocktails and things like that, where they attack the soldiers, and then what's going on the news is the fact that the soldiers fired back or retaliated. But now, since no one would cover it, they won't do anything because most of the war Hamas says on Israel is a PR war, and when they can engage it, they won't engage at all. There's no benefit for them.
So in term because the world is focused on this pandemic, they'll know they'll get no publicity in the
Exactly. Yeah.
Arab-Israeli conflict on two-state solution talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's a hairy situation. I know there's a ton of anti-Israel sentiment especially in my community, where anti-SJWism sort of intersects with the alt-right. Um, but without going any deeper, because it's a very deep subject, so just tell you there's two sides to the story. I know people like to blame Israel, especially because the alt-right sees Jews as a monolith, and Israel being a Jewish state, they usually think, oh, the extreme leftist Jewish guy that I see on TV that I don't like, that's pushing all the open borders, socialism, communism, feminism, and everything. That's not the average guy in Israel who's a Middle Eastern actually, and living in a right-wing society that's been voting for a right-wing government for like 20, 30 years, that's pro-Trump. We even have we forgot its name in English, but we basically named a place in the Golan Heights over
Yeah,
by
I heard
Trump.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know why people think Jewish people are monoliths. But Israel, even though those those leftist Jews, a lot of them support Israel because of Jewish sentiment, I don't think the Israeli public should be condemned because of those people who are running around and creating a bad name for us when we're actually a right-wing country, very supportive of Trump, very anti-PC. Israel is probably one of the least PC cultures around the world. Like anything goes in here. So yeah.
Well, you've already said to us, don't succumb to white guilt, which is exactly what we
Yeah.
need to do in Australia and other Western nations. But I just want to pick on something that you said before, is that because you mentioned the alt-right there, they claim that Israel and IPAC run the United States, where you said before that it's the US, whoever's in power, they can dictate how
Yeah.
Israel is. Can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can do a complete deep dive on that. First of all, people, when they talk about Israel affecting the US election, they always go to, again, like rich Jewish moguls like Chaim Saban and George Soros. George Soros isn't even pro-Israel. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
that's one
more
of the
to
weirdest things there.
because he's a progressive leftist billionaire. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
just ethnically Jewish, and if you go into like his when he was in Hungary, he and his family collaborated with
Yeah,
the cross arrow, bow arrow. What were they called?
I
The
forget it as well, but
the
yeah.
puppet Nazi regime there, but it's used because the anti-Semitism accusation is used by both left and right, and so if you're criticizing George Soros for promoting globalism, a left-wing group such as the Anti-Defamation League will say you can't do that because it's anti-Semitic, even though you're attacking him because he's funding
Yeah.
all of these that's got nothing to do with his Jewish heritage.
Yeah, I think the ADL does a ton of damage for us rather than actually good work. And one of the things that I'd like to focus when people talk about Jewish interference in the US election is that sometimes they get the numbers wrong because they'll talk about them funding Trump or funding Hillary, but their campaign contributions are very, very small compared to the overall revenue generated by their campaign. If you look into it, I think Hillary had like 1.5 billion dollars generated, and only like $70 million out of it are quote unquote Jewish contributions. Um, Obviously, lobbyists are bad. I don't like lobbying in our in any government system. But if you look into it, lobbyists lobbyists usually back up politicians that support what they believe in rather than just paying them money to change their opinion, which is harder to do. And if they really would have affected the US election so much, they'll probably pay more money than just 30 or 60 million, which is chump change when it comes to election. So that's on the contribution side. A lot of people talk about how much Israel has power over the U.S. election, and I think it's true. But Israel as a topic rather than the government itself running the having part in the U.S. election. Uh, a lot of people in the U.S. have certain opinions on Israel, so that's why it's such a big part of the U.S. discussion, because you have a ton of the Christian public in the U.S. that's very, very pro-Israel, because essentially that's part of their what do you call it? The end of times in Christianity comes when the Jews rule Israel or something like that. So that's why they want to keep Israel in power over there. So you have that, and you have on the Democratic side you have leftist Jews who are leftist but have are favorable to Israel because it's a Jewish country.
Such as Dianne Feinstein.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that first of all people should stop thinking of Jews as a monolith, but because most of us in Israel don't actually like those leftist Jews, only not only giving us bad names, but promoting politicians who are bad to our country. And like I said, the U.S. is way more influential on Israel rather than Israel on the U.S. Because if we have a conservative or rather a Republican president, basically Israel has almost carte blanche to do anything it wants in the Middle East. And once you have a Democrat like Obama, it's time to talk about the two-state solution, give some parts of Jerusalem, and they'll curtail any even defensive operations like the ones that happened through the Obama administrations when Gaza kept attacking Israel. They kidnapped three of our guys. Was it called? I forgot the name. Protective Edge, I think that was the name of the operation. So if let's say Trump was the president in that time, Israel would have been have had more of a chance to do actual change over there with a military operation rather than with a democratic president who would curtail their advancements there and would ask them to seize it immediately. So the U.S. The U.S. administration has more power over the Israeli administration that people would actually like to believe, and they affect our day-to-day life more than they actually would like to think. And also, people like to talk about the U.S. aid to Israel, which is one of the lowest ones they have in the U.S. Like the U.S. contributes, I think, or used to contribute and spend around $50 billion over Afghanistan in aid money and what do you call it, some other costs as well. But Israel, their aid to Israel is mostly in the forms of weapons that they force on us to purchase for a very small amount, which actually
How do they
limits.
force you to purchase?
I don't. They don't force us to purchase, but when Israel purchased those guns, we're not allowed. I think there's an agreement that we're not allowed to send our own military the shit we create in our military, like the Iron Dome system and things like that. We're only allowed to sell it to the U.S. and countries they allow it, I think. And most of their aid that comes to us is in the form of, like I said, weapons, magazines, ammos, usually surplus that they sell to us, and that's actually money that aid is actually money that then goes back to the U.S. economy because basically
Their
we paid for
military-industrial complex.
Yeah, so that's why the U.S. aid to Israel is such a red herring, because it's actually their military-industrial complex forced upon us. We obviously get cheap weapons, but from what I understand, we could actually make way more money selling the shit we develop here, because Israel has a ton of very sophisticated military systems, like the trophy system. We have a ton of good anti-air missiles that I think we're only allowed to sell to the U.S. and several countries, which is very limiting to us. So yeah.
It's a new perspective, some information, that is new to, I think, all of our audience. Now, you've mentioned a few times that Israel is not a monolith. Your home city is Tel Aviv, which a lot of people in the West probably don't know of the city, let alone its culture. They just know Israel, the capital is Jerusalem, Arab-Israeli conflict, and they think that because Benjamin Netanyahu is a staunchly conservative prime minister, and they see the footage around Jerusalem of those Orthodox Jews that you mentioned with the long hair and the hats, that's what all of Israel's like. But Tel Aviv actually has a reputation as a very liberal, progressive city, the most progressive one in the Middle East. But it's pretty easy to get that title there.
That's not a title you hang over your wall. I think Bibi is mostly centrist, because he had a ton of opportunities to basically flatten Gaza, because they provoke him every single time with those random missiles trickling into Israel, and he did basically nothing. Every election cycles they promise, we're going to destroy Hamas, we're going to do this and that, and it basically does nothing.
Do you call him Bibi?
Yeah, I'll call him a centrist, because a right-wing politician, like,
is that even the term?
I'll say if Obama was the Israeli prime minister, he would have probably flattened Gaza by now, considering of how many drone strikes he had in the U.S., because he had many provocations in here. Like they constantly attack Israeli agriculture with explosives, not explosive, flammable kites, which is a ridiculous notion. That's one of their ways to attack Israel. Obviously, the missiles, mortars, which are very hard to defend against because there's very, very little time, unlike the missiles, which have some travel time that you can use to go to the shelter, and you have obviously the anti-missile defense system, but the anti-mortar systems are not as sophisticated enough that you can put them with a decent effectiveness to actually protect your citizens. So that's why it's still dangerous. But I think that any Democrat, any a neoliberal who would have ruled Israel, it would have probably flattened Gaza by now. Not kidding. So I'd characterize Bibi as a centrist, but not by his statements, obviously, because he knows there's a right-wing public in Israel. So that's why you have all of his extreme
So
statements.
don't take what he says at face value, which basically you should take. That should be the rule for any politician. Don't take what they say at face value.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'll characterize him as centrist just by his actions, not by his words. Obviously, by his words, he sounds like an extreme right-wing guy, maybe even authoritarian, because he had several of the government positions, like what they call it. I forgot them. The media minister, the minister of defense. He had several positions. They call it cases in Israel. The guys who takes care of it, because he fired so many people out of his government last times. So yeah, I think there's also a saying in Israel when you talk about Tel Aviv, they call it a country of Tel Aviv, because they live in their own bubble, because it's so liberal. It has a ton of leftist sentiment, obviously, because it's liberal. It's very pro-peace. It's obviously it looks like if you go into Tel Aviv, it's just like being in LA or in New York. It's a very, very liberal city.
Sounds like Melbourne, where I live, because Melbourne has the reputation in Australia of being the Antifa, SJW, hipster. We also have an Australian expression, latte sippers, smash shavo on toast. It's evolved to now, and it's commonly referred to the state as the People's Democratic Republic of Victoria, because our premier is from the socialist faction of the Labor Party, Daniel Andrews.
So that's Tel Aviv, basically. Most of the people in Tel Aviv are behind the Labor Party in Israel, or used to be. Now it's Benny Gantz, who's like another centrist, but not as effective as Bibi with his message, I guess. Like I said, they call it the country of Tel Aviv because they live in their own separate bubbles. When usually Gaza attacks, their missiles won't get anywhere near Tel Aviv because the technology wasn't there back then, for them at least. And now that they do get to Tel Aviv, they never cause any damage because now they have the Iron Dome system, which shoots it down from the air. So that's why they literally live in a bubble, a protective bubble for missiles. So that's why it's also hard for them to relate with the more southern parts of Israel, who constantly need to go to shelters once we're in one of those operations against Gaza, because thousands of rockets are being fired daily.
And obviously with your conservative, I'm not sure if you define yourself a conservative, but right-wing.
Yeah, I'll define myself, right-wing libertarian mostly.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's it like for you being in that liberal city? Because, well, for the past year in Melbourne, we've had the climate protests, the Extinction Rebellion, people supergluing themselves to roads, and that protests in Melbourne now are basically de facto banned now. There's no exemption for protests, but has there been those sort of ridiculous type of protests and disturbances that have happened?
Yeah, so I live basically in the suburbs of Tel Aviv, so I'm in a more centrist or conservative area. But
same with me.
So I briefly studied in the Tel Aviv University, which was an enlightening experience, to say the least, in terms of what you see outside of your own bubble. I got to see a ton of what you would call a diverse crowd. And one of the funniest stories I have not funniest, one of the most weird stories that I ran into was I actually studied philosophy there. So um, one day there was a story going around campus of what do you call it, like a professor assistant who usually teaches the smaller classes had sex with one of the female students, and she accused him of rape, which eventually turned out to be not the case. He was just, they consensually had sex, and then he kept badgering her on through text. So he basically had no game. So yeah, so I was in our Greek philosophy class, finishing it up, and we're about to leave to a logics class, which is one of the toughest ones if you miss any of the classes, because it's basically like math. You put problems into equations and then solve them with philosophic logic. So I'm being approached by two guys. One of them is male and one of them is female. It's like, oh, you coming to the protests? I'm like, what protest? It's like there's a professor assistant who's raped one of the students, and the administration did nothing about it. I'm like, oh, real? Oh, really? And then when I later read on, obviously it was like only the first day of the case there weren't any facts on the tables. The administration couldn't have done anything at all because they were just basically investigating it, and they were going to protest it straight away and miss an important lesson as well just to do it. So I was like, no, I'm not gonna miss fucking logics class and then go just spend 2 days later just trying to catch up with it because it's such a hard subject. And almost the entire Greek philosophy class went to protest it, even though they had zero facts about the protest. They believed the woman straight away with no info at all. They blamed the administration for not doing anything, but was basically the first few days they couldn't even do anything, even if they wanted to, because there wasn't even enough time to react. So they're very knee-jerk about protests. And one more SJW related story that I had was when I actually served in the army, which, funny enough, you wouldn't expect to hear intersectional feminist theory in there, because you have female soldier who almost, when I served, they almost served as long as the guys. Now they do serve as the same term as the guys. But one of them, I don't know what we were talking about, but you have like a once a month or once a week discussion in the army about some certain topics, and she started going off about rape culture, which really caught me off guard. It was like, wow, I'm like watching one of my videos right now, and I can't record it because it's kind of classified. So that's the only experiences I have in Israel with SJWs. But it was really weird to see a female soldier in especially a very, what you would call an empowered unit, because you have commanders there coming out of the unit. So it was really weird to see a quote-unquote empowered soldier start spouting out feminist theory in the middle of a discussion. Can I go to the bathroom real quick? I gotta use the WC.
Oh, we're just about to wrap up now.
Okay.
Don't worry, I need to go as well, so I'm keen to wrap up now. But we'll finish on when do you think that the lockdown will finish in Israel and it'll be declared the virus contained, and do you think that everyday life will become different post this pandemic?
I think we'll feel the effect post this pandemic for maybe a year or two until the economy gets back up. I think for those of you that have some money saved up, once we have the cure or the vaccine, what do you call it? The stock market is gonna skyrocket like thousands of percentage, just because people believe in Trump and in his economy. So if he gets reelected, and in several months they'll find the vaccine or the cure, which from what I've heard, they're making headway in Israel because they started getting plasma donations from the guys who actually heals from the disease. So I think once they find a cure, that's like a good opportunity for those of you who saved money, who can buy the stock market when it's low. Obviously, you're taking a risk. I'm not qualified to give this advice, but
It's not financial advice. We have those
yeah,
laws here
exactly.
as well.
Yeah, so if you believe that the market will be the same way that it was in the previous like 40 years, like when they got over the 2008 crisis and the dot-com bubble, it will go up eventually. So you have a ton of investing opportunity there. Uh, Hopefully, we'll get back to it pretty fast. China will pay for it, preferably with an economic embargo. Will lower our reliance on Chinese produce, not go to war with them, hopefully. And I'll think that the damage will stay there for a while, especially the people who have it. And from what I've heard, it scars your lung tissue, so there'll be permanent damage in terms of health as well. I think it will take time, but we'll get over it. Hopefully, make those responsible for it pay for it, as well as the leftist pundits and leftist government guys who told you to hug a Chinese guy in the middle of February when it was running amok across the world. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it.
We feel the same here. Those type of economic and also cultural sentiments about how things should change, and that we hope they change. I've definitely appreciated you coming on tonight, because I know
Thanks.
that this is not something that you normally do. You're the editing compilation guy.
Yeah.
But if anyone is bored during the lockdown and they need a laugh, then they know to go to the SJW Central channel.
Yeah, thank you, man.
All right, stay safe.
Peace, guys.
All right, that was quite an all-encompassing discussion there. Obviously, we talked about how the lockdown is going in, what's it like over in Israel. But we also learned some of his perspective on the politics of Israel and the wider geopolitical issues there, which of course I've been following the chat tonight. So you all of you in there can make what you like about what our guest said. Margot has, I know, been busy moderating, and I know that she asked what his name was. So we just decided to refer to him as the operator of the SJW Central channel, since that is how he is known, but that is an actual photo of him. I didn't want to put because the channel logo is of Trigglypuff. You'll remember her from the 2016 UMass talk with Milo Yiannopoulos, Stephen Crowder, and the factual feminist Christina Hoff Sommers, where she kept chanting, "Keep your hate speech off this campus." So I hope you enjoyed that interview tonight, as I do at the end of every show at the moment. I go through the infection and death tallies of corona virus. When I say tally, that's sort of dehumanizing this pandemic, but it gives us a good indication of where we're at. So if we have a look here, so USA is now leading the infections with 336,000. They're fast approaching 10,000 deaths. Spain second in terms of infections, 135,000. They've got 13,000 deaths. They're now catching up to Italy. Well, they've got more infections. Italy's got 128,000 infections with 15,000 deaths. And if we go here, Israel, they're at 8,600 cases and 51 deaths. In Australia, if I can find us there, we're at 5,795. Our deaths have gone up significantly today. It's at 39 present. If I go to our health website, it gives us, you can see there the curve is flattening there. And if you have a look here, this is the state-by-state breakdown. So obviously New South Wales has got 2,600, Victoria second with 1,158, and we've just conducted our over 300,000 tests now. So that widespread testing we are achieving, but as we were saying to our guest, it'd be nice if we had some face masks here. They weren't all shipped overseas, and also good if we had more regular thermometer checks as well. There hasn't been too much demands of regular thermometer checks, because that'd be a good idea if the supermarkets did have thermometer checks, and also at schools as well. That would also be a good idea as well. So that's it for WilmsFront tonight. It's been good to be back on Monday nights. And of course, WilmsFront will be back 7 p.m. Melbourne time, where I'll premiere my interview with Dr. Tanvir Ahmed, local Australian psychiatrist, talking about basically the mental health aspects of living in lockdown and all the implications of it. So that will be interesting, and I will enjoy playing it for you. But coming up now at I think it's still, I don't know, it's at 9 p.m. or 9:15 p.m. Melbourne time, XYZ Live on the Matty Rose Live YouTube channel, so stay tuned for that. And of course, tomorrow night, Tuesday and Cuckables is back, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time on the show's YouTube channel. It'll be myself, Reg Penny, and local Melbourne patriot Johnny Moore. So looking forward to getting back into the regular Tuesday show. Of course, visit timwilms.com for my own social media links, and to check out the podcast version of the show, unshackled.net for all the latest news, and of course rationalrise.tv for all of the Unshackled production and Australian alt media archives. So good night, everybody. Thank you so much for watching.
Thanks for tuning in to WilmsFront. Visit timwilms.com or Rational Rise TV to view the archive of episodes. And keep visiting the unshackled.net to view all our shows, and to keep up with the latest real news and analysis.